Chapter 7 Under Attack. "We're back!" Gibbs shouted. Will searched the deck until he found Elizabeth. "The sun's coming up," she said, smiling. "We're not safe yet. Davy Jones and Lord Beckett are still somewhere on the ocean, but we've saved Jack Sparrow and escaped from the world of the dead." Barbossa and Jack were smiling too. Everyone was happy, and then they all pulled out their guns. Barbossa and Elizabeth pointed their guns at Jack. Will and Gibbs pointed theirs at Barbossa. Jack pointed his gun at Will, then quickly pointed a second one at Barbossa. Barbossa also pulled out a second gun and pointed it at Gibbs. Elizabeth pointed her second gun at Barbossa. Even with 4 guns pointing at him, Barbossa didn't seem worried. "The Brethren Court is meeting at Shipwreck Cove," he said. "Jack, you and I are going there." "If a pirate lord's a meeting," Jack said angrily, "I'm going to sail my ship the other way." "They're meeting to fight Beckett," Elizabeth said, "and you're a pirate lord." "You're not running away," Will said. "The agents will search for us until we're all dead, except you," Barbossa told Jack. Jack laughed. "Then I'll be Captain Jack Sparrow, the last pirate. I like the sound of that." Suddenly, he fired the gun that was pointed at Barbossa. Nothing happened. Barbossa, Will, and Elizabeth all fired their guns too. There was no smoke. There were no shots. "The guns are too wet. They won't work," Gibbs explained. Will threw his useless gun away. "Now we have to work together," he said. "We need water. The maps show an island near here with fresh water." It was a good plan. Jack looked nervously at Barbossa. "You take the men to the island," he said. "I'll stay with the ship." "I'm not leaving my ship," Barbossa said. "And Jack's not leaving his ship," Will said. "Here's an idea. You both go and leave the ship with me, all right?" Barbossa and Jack were unhappy, but they agreed. A short time later, they sailed toward an empty beach. Will, Elizabeth, Tai Huang, and a small group of pirates waited on the Pearl. "Are you still going to run, Jack?" Barbossa asked. "Can you run away from the world? That's the problem. You'll be the last pirate, and one day you'll die. Then there will be no pirates." "We came back after we died," Jack said. "But can you be sure it will happen again?" Barbossa said. Jack didn't want to think about his next death. It was too soon after his first one. He had to work with Barbossa. "So, the Brethren Court must meet," he said softly. "It's the only way that we can win against Beckett and Davy Jones," Barbossa replied. On the island, the pirates climbed up a hill to a freshwater stream that ran into a clear pool. Almost immediately, someone shouted from the beach. The pirates ran back. Ragetti was pointing at the ocean. The Black Pearl wasn't alone in the water. Another ship, Shao Feng's Empress, was next to her. Jack and Barbossa heard a noise behind them and turned. Tai Huang and his men were pointing their guns at them. Barbossa and Jack were taken back to the Pearl. There were a lot of Chinese pirates on the ship. Elizabeth Swann was now tied between two guards. "Xiao Feng," Barbossa said, "you found us." "Some of us are lucky," Xiao Feng answered. He moved closer to Jack. Jack was trying, unsuccessfully, to hide behind Barbossa. Suddenly, Xiao Feng hit him hard in the face. "Jack Sparrow," Xiao Feng said, "you once hurt my feelings." Will came up from below the deck. He saw Jack's face and Elizabeth between the guards and hurried across to Xiao Feng. "She's not part of our agreement," Will said. "Untie her." "What agreement?" Barbossa asked. Xiao Feng laughed. "You heard Captain Turner," he said to his men. "Untie her." "Captain Turner?" Jack shouted. "Is he captain of my ship?" "Yes," Gibbs said. "Turner and the Chinese sailors took the Pearl. Now he's taking us to find the Dutchman. He wants to save his father." The guards untied Elizabeth. She looked sadly at Will. "You didn't tell me your plans," she said. "I need the Pearl," Will said. "That's why I'm here." "He needs the Pearl," Jack said, pointing at Will. Then he turned to Elizabeth. "And you felt bad because you killed me." He pointed at Barbossa. "And you want me to be at the Brethren Court. Didn't anyone save me because they miss me?" Gibbs, Marty, and Cotton lifted their hands. Then Pinto and Rigetti lifted their hands too. Jack moved toward his men. "I'm standing with them." But Xiao Feng stopped him. "I'm sorry, Jack," he said. His voice didn't sound sorry. "But as an old friend who wants to see you first." He pointed over Jack's shoulder, and Jack turned. Lord Cutler Beckett's ship, the Endeavour, was coming round the island. "Oh, no," Jack thought. "How many times have I escaped from the East India Trading Company? Now they've caught me." Chapter 8. The Goddess Calypso. Xiao Feng's guards pulled Jack into the captain's room on the Endeavour. Lord Cutler Beckett stood at the window, looking out at the ocean. The guards dropped Jack's things on the table. Then they left the room. Jack began to walk quietly around the room. He was looking for something. "You can stop searching, Jack," Beckett said. "It's not here." Jack stopped moving. "What?" he asked. Beckett turned around. "Davy Jones's heart. It's on the Flying Dutchman. You can't use it to pay Captain Davy Jones." So, Jack thought, the heart isn't here, but now I know where it is. "I don't need to pay him," Jack said. "I died, remember? Why am I here?" Beckett picked up Jack's compass. "You brought me this," he said. "Now I'm offering you a job, working for the East India Trading Company. Working for me." "You offered me a job before," Jack said. "The answer is still no." Beckett looked very angry. "You haven't changed," he said. "Our business is finished. My men will kill you." "No, our business isn't finished," Jack said. I want to make a suggestion." He took a piece of 8 from a hidden pocket and held it between his fingers. "The Brethren called." Beckett laughed. "I already know about the meeting of the Brethren Court," he said. "Talk to Jones for me. Tell him to free me," Jack said. "I'll take you to Shipwreck Cove and give you the pirate lords." At the same time, Will was having problems on the Black Pearl. The ship was already full of Xiao Feng's pirates, but then Mercer came on with some sailors from the Endeavour. Quickly they ran across and took the ship's wheel from Tai Huang. "I don't understand," Will said to Xiao Feng. "This wasn't part of our agreement." "This is now a company ship," Mercer said with a terrible smile. "You agreed," Will said, turning to Xiao Feng. "The Black Pearl is mine." "Yes, but I lied," Xiao Feng said. One of his men came up behind Will and hit him. Will fell to the floor, and 2 other men tied his arms. Xiao Feng turned to Mercer. "Lord Beckett agreed," he said. "The Black Pearl is mine." Mercer smiled again. "Yes," he said, "but Lord Beckett won't give up the only ship that can fight the Dutchman." Xiao Feng looked around at the East India Trading Company men. All of them had guns. "I can fight," he thought, "but I'll lose. Beckett will follow me and kill me." The ship was now Mercer's. Xiao Feng was very angry. Barbossa came up next to him. "The company men don't follow the law of the Brethren," Barbossa said quietly. "They have the Dutchman," Xiao Feng said. "And what do the Brethren have that can fight the fastest ship on the ocean?" "We have Calypso," Barbossa replied. Xiao Feng looked surprised. Every pirate knew the story of Calypso, the goddess of the oceans. "Calypso commanded the oceans," he said slowly. "If she liked you, she made you strong. When she loved a captain, she brought him good weather and smooth waters. Then the first Brethren Court caught her and turned her into a woman. The pirate lords became commanders of the oceans. But that's only a story. There isn't a real goddess in the body of a woman." Or was there? Xiao Feng looked at the only woman on the ship, Elizabeth. "Calypso," he said. "It's just an old story." "No," said Barbossa. "The goddess is here on earth. There was a time when a sailor made his own future. I want to bring back that time, so I need the Brethren Court. All of it." "What do you suggest?" Xiao Feng said quietly. "What will you accept?" Barbossa asked. He knew the answer. Xiao Feng pointed across the ship. "The girl," he said. Elizabeth couldn't hear the men, but Will could. "You'll help us to escape if we give you Elizabeth?" he asked. "Yes," said Xiao Feng, as Elizabeth turned toward them. "Never!" shouted Will angrily. "All right," said Elizabeth. She looked bravely at Xiao Feng. "What?" Will said, surprised. "It's not all right." "You put us in this position," Elizabeth said to him. "This will free us. I choose to go with Xiao Feng." "No!" Will shouted. His heart was breaking. Xiao Feng smiled happily. "I'm pleased," he began. He reached out to take her arm. Elizabeth pulled it away. To her surprise, he held up his hands. "I'm sorry," he said. "So we have an agreement?" Barbossa asked. "Yes," Xiao Feng said. "My men will steal the pearl for you, and I'll help you call the Brethren Court together. Elizabeth will sail away with me on the Empress." Chapter 9. The New Pirate Lord. Jack Sparrow was also making an agreement with Lord Beckett. "You can have Barbossa," Jack said, "and Turner. Yes, you can have Turner." "And Miss Swan?" Beckett asked. "The other people on the Pearl will go with me," Jack answered. "And I'll take you to Shipwreck Cove. Do we agree?" Lord Beckett smiled and picked up the compass. "Jack," he said, "I have this wonderful compass. It will point to what I want most." "Yes," Jack said, "and that's not the Brethren Court, is it?" "No?" Beckett asked. "Then what is it, Jack?" "Me," said Jack. "Dead." Beckett opened the compass. It was pointing at Jack. "I hate Jack Sparrow," he thought. "He's right. The compass is useless. It won't take me to Shipwreck Cove." Beckett threw the compass back to Jack. "I'll kill you first," he said. "Then the compass will tell me where Shipwreck Cove is." Jack spoke quickly. "You'll arrive at the cove, and you won't get in. You need someone inside to bring the pirate lords outside." Beckett thought for a minute. "Can you bring them to me?" "I'm Captain Jack Sparrow," Jack said. "Do we have an agreement?" He held out his hand. Suddenly, the ship moved to one side. Beckett fell forward, and Jack took his hand. "Agreed," Jack cried. He ran to the door as cannon fire shook the Endeavour. Beckett followed close behind him. On deck they saw many bodies, and smoke coming from the cannon below. The Empress was sailing away, and gunfire was still coming from the Pearl. His ship! Jack looked for a way to get over to the Pearl. He ran to one of the cannon, pointed it toward the Pearl, and climbed inside it. Beckett and his men jumped out of the way as the cannon fired. A big cannonball shot across the ocean, destroying the top of the Endeavour's sails. Jack was holding the cannonball, and he flew straight toward his ship. On the Pearl, Barbossa saw Jack fly through the air. There was a loud noise of breaking wood. Then Jack stood in front of him. He was completely unhurt. "Did you miss me?" Jack asked, laughing. He saw Will. "Put him in prison," he commanded. His men took Will down to the prison in the bottom of the ship. Jack smiled happily. He was back on his ship. On the Endeavour, Lord Beckett looked at his broken sails. "How long will it take to repair the ship?" he asked an officer. Another sail fell onto the deck. "The Endeavour won't sail again for a long time," the officer replied. On the Empress, Elizabeth stood and waited for Xiao Feng. "What does he want from me?" she asked herself. The pirate lord came quietly into the room and watched her. Elizabeth's eyes and skin shone. She looked like a goddess. He offered her a glass of wine. She accepted it nervously. "This is a surprise," she said. "Aren't you going to put me in prison for stealing your maps?" Xiao Feng smiled over the edge of his wine-glass. "I can't put you in prison, Calypso." "What is he talking about?" Elizabeth asked herself. "I know that Calypso isn't your only name," Xiao Feng continued, "but it's what we call you." "We?" Elizabeth asked. "The Brethren Court. We hid you in the shape of a woman." Elizabeth tried to stay calm. "He thinks I'm a goddess," she thought. She asked, "What do you want from me?" "Your love, if you choose to give it to me." "And if I don't choose to love you?" she said. "Then I will accept that, too," Xiao Feng said. He put his hands on her shoulders and kissed her. Surprised, Elizabeth pushed him away. Suddenly, there was a loud noise. Somebody was attacking the ship. The pirates ran to the cannon. Elizabeth could see the gunfire through the windows. Then she saw Xiao Feng through the smoke. He was lying on the floor, with a long, sharp piece of wood in his chest. "Xiao Feng!" she cried. "Here," he said weakly. He pulled a gold coin from around his neck. "Take it. I must give it to the next Brethren Lord." "Me?" Elizabeth said, surprised. "Go to Shipwreck Cove in my place," he said. "Captain!" a voice shouted from outside the room. Tai Huang opened the door. "They've taken the ship!" Tai Huang cried. "We cannot—" He stopped when he saw Elizabeth. "Calypso," Xiao Feng said. Then his eyes closed. Elizabeth turned to Tai Huang and showed him the coin. "He made me captain," she said. The new captain of the Empress stepped onto the deck. Tai Huang was close behind her. Elizabeth saw their attacker. It was the Flying Dutchman. The Dutchman's sailors were running onto the Empress and tying up her sailors. Elizabeth couldn't see Davy Jones, but suddenly she noticed Admiral Norrington. "James?" she said. Norrington's eyes widened with surprise when he saw her. "Elizabeth!" he shouted happily. "I heard you were dead." Davy Jones arrived on deck. He looked closely at the prisoners. "Who is your captain?" he asked. Tai Huang pointed at Elizabeth. Elizabeth stood straight and tall. Her eyes were cold, and she didn't show her feelings. "She isn't a governor's daughter now," Norrington thought. "She really is a pirate captain." He turned to his soldiers. "We'll pull the ship behind us. Put the sailors into the Dutchman's prison." He turned to Elizabeth. "You can have my room." "No, thank you," Elizabeth said proudly. "I'll stay with my men." She followed her pirates. They were locked in small, cold rooms deep inside the ship. "Will's father," Bootstrap Bill works on the Dutchman, Elizabeth suddenly remembered. Maybe he can help us to escape. Bootstrap? She called softly. Bill Turner? Suddenly, a pair of eyes opened in the wooden side of the ship next to her. You know my name? Said a shaky voice. Elizabeth jumped to her feet. So this was Will's father. He was more wood than man. Only his face moved. I know your son, she said. Will Turner. William? Is he alive? Bootstrap asked. Ah, and he's coming to save me. He promised. Yes, she said. Will's alive, and he wants to help you. But the hope was disappearing from Bootstrap's eyes. No, he said quietly. He can't come. He won't come. He'll try, Elizabeth said. You're his father. Bootstrap looked at her with sad eyes. I know you, the old pirate said. He spoke of you. You're Elizabeth. Yes, Elizabeth said, surprised. Will can't save me, Bootstrap said. He won't, because of you. If he kills Davy Jones, he'll have to take his place. He'll be captain of the Dutchman forever. If he saves me, he loses you. Yes, Elizabeth said quietly. Bootstrap began to disappear into the wood of the ship. He won't choose me. Tell him not to come. It's too late. His eyes closed, and his face stopped moving. Now he was part of the wooden side of the ship again. Will's father was gone. Chapter 10. Jack's Plan. The Endeavour's sails were repaired, and the ship was following the Black Pearl. Lord Beckett stood on deck. Suddenly he saw a lot of birds above the water. "Sail over there," he ordered. As the Endeavour sailed closer, the noise of the birds grew louder. They were flying around a dead body that was tied to a piece of wood. This isn't an accident. It's a sign, Beckett thought. Someone is leaving the bodies for us to follow. They're taking us straight to the Black Pearl. On another part of the ocean, Will Turner tied another dead body to a piece of wood. He lifted it to push it over the side of the ship. Then a voice spoke from behind him, and he stopped. "I knew the prison couldn't hold you," said Jack. Will dropped the body and lifted his sword. "Stop, William," Jack said. "I'm not going to call anyone." "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving signs," Will said, "for Beckett." Jack said. "Very smart. What will you do when Beckett arrives at the Brethren's meeting place?" "Ask him to free my father." Jack laughed. "Now, that's not smart. Beckett won't help you. There's only one way to free your father." "I must kill Davy Jones," Will said sadly. "And you know the price for killing Jones," Jack said. "You'll be captain of the Dutchman. You'll take the souls of dead people to the next world. You'll only step on land every 10 years. "I know," Will said unhappily. "If I help my father, I lose Elizabeth." In a low voice he added, "She wanted to save you. She felt bad about killing you." Suddenly Jack had an idea. "You don't have to choose between Elizabeth and your father," he said. "Another person can kill Jones." "Who?" Will asked. "I don't understand." Jack smiled. "You?" Jack Sparrow became excited as he explained his plan. "I'll go on to the Dutchman and find the wooden box. I'll put a knife through Jones's heart, and your father will be free. You'll also be free for Elizabeth, and I'll be free to sail the oceans." He smiled. "You'll have to do Jones's work," Will said. "So I won't be completely free, but I'll never die. I died once, and I didn't like it. I don't want to do it again." He put his compass into Will's hands. "Here," he said, "say hello to Davy Jones for me." Then he pushed Will over the side of the ship and smiled down at him. As usual, Jack's following his own plan, Will thought. It's going to be a very long night. Elizabeth Swann was in the small prison room on the Dutchman. The ship sailed smoothly, pulling the Empress behind it. Suddenly, the door opened. It was James Norrington. "Be quiet," he said. "Come this way. Hurry." Elizabeth jumped to her feet. Her sailors were also free. Silently, they all ran up toward the deck. "What are you doing?" Elizabeth asked Norrington. "Helping you," he answered. Inside the prison room, a pair of eyes opened in the side of the ship. Bootstrap Bill saw the open door. Slowly, he pulled himself out of the wood and stepped forward. Norrington took the Chinese sailors to the line that tied the Empress to the Dutchman. Hand over hand, Xiao Feng's sailors pulled themselves back to their own ship. Norrington turned to Elizabeth. "Don't go to Shipwreck Cove. Somebody has told Beckett about the meeting of the Brethren." "It's too late to earn my forgiveness," Elizabeth said. "I know," Norrington said, "but I still love you." "He's sorry for everything he's done," Elizabeth thought. She took his hand. "Come with us," she said. Almost all of the Chinese soldiers were on the Empress now. "Who's there?" a voice said from the darkness. Somebody walked slowly toward them. Norrington turned quickly. "Go!" he shouted to Elizabeth. "I'll follow you." Quickly, he took her in his arms and kissed her. Then he pushed her toward the line. "Go! Now!" he shouted. Elizabeth stepped over the side of the ship and took the line. She was the captain of the Empress, and her sailors needed her. "I hope that James follows us soon," she thought. Bootstrap stepped into the light. He saw Elizabeth, his son's true love. "That's not right," he thought. "Sailors on the Dutchman must stay with the ship until the end of time." Suddenly, he started to shout, "Help! A prisoner is escaping!" Sailors quickly ran across the deck. Elizabeth was halfway across the line. She heard the noise and looked back. The Dutchman's sailors were moving toward Norrington. "James!" she cried. She started to climb back toward the Dutchman. Norrington saw her and pulled out his gun. He shot through the line and cut it into 2 pieces. Elizabeth fell into the water. As Norrington faced the Dutchman's sailors, Bootstrap moved forward. He still remembered his purpose as a pirate. He had to protect the ship. He pushed his sword through Norrington's heart. Elizabeth pulled herself up the line to her ship. She looked back at the Dutchman. "James!" she cried again. Norrington fell to the deck, dying. There was nothing that Elizabeth could do. The Empress sailed away into the dark, leaving the Dutchman and the dead body of James Norrington behind. "The Admiral's dead!" one of the Dutchman's sailors shouted. "Can we take command of the ship again?" They ran to the captain's room, where Davy Jones's heart was held prisoner. Mercer and a group of soldiers were standing with their guns pointed at the heart. "Nothing has changed," Mercer said calmly. Jones watched angrily as Mercer relocked the box. The heart and the Dutchman still belonged to the East India Trading Company. Chapter 11. The Brethren Court. Pirate ships from all over the world were at Shipwreck Cove. "I've never seen so many pirates in one place before," Barbossa said happily. Jack was worried. "And I borrowed money from all of them." Barbossa heard a noise and turned. Tia Dalma was watching him closely. "Barbossa," she said in a low voice, "why aren't you preparing the cannon? All the brethren are here. They will have to do what you want." She stepped closer to him. "Be careful, Barbossa," she said. "We had an agreement when I brought you back from the dead. I can send you there again." Barbossa spoke angrily. "Yes, we had an agreement, but I will decide how we succeed." He pointed toward Shipwreck Cove. 9 pirate lords caught you, Calypso. 9 are needed to free you. Until then, I won't take orders from you." He looked up. "Mr. Pinto! Mr. Ragetti!" he called. He pushed Tia Dalma, Calypso, the goddess of the ocean, toward them. "Take this woman to the prison." Pinto and Ragetti took her away. Barbossa could feel her angry eyes on his back. He couldn't worry about that now. "When the court meets, I'll trick the pirate lords," he thought. "They'll free Calypso, and she'll forgive me. She'll make me the greatest pirate on the ocean. Until then, I'll keep her locked up. I don't want her to destroy my plans." Out in the ocean, Beckett's sailors pulled Will onto the Endeavour. He was very wet, and his hands were tied. Lord Beckett's ship was next to the Dutchman, and Beckett was also making plans. He called Davy Jones onto the deck. "I think you know Mr. Turner," Beckett said. He turned to Will. "Tell him. Barbossa has called the Brethren Court together for a reason." Will explained. "He wants to free someone named Calypso." Jones was afraid. "No," he said. "They can't. She's a prisoner in a woman's body forever. That was the agreement." Will looked at him carefully. Suddenly he understood. "You told them how to catch her," he said, "and that's why you cut out your heart." "Be quiet!" Jones shouted. He turned to Beckett. "We must stop them. She will destroy us all." Lord Beckett looked thoughtful. "We must find the Brethren Court," he said, "and that's a problem." He turned to Will. "You're here now. How will we find them?" "Promise me that you won't hurt Elizabeth," Will said.
"Ah," Beckett said slowly. "Elizabeth.
I hear that Miss Swan is now captain of the Empress." Will looked surprised. He turned to Davy Jones. "But you won't hurt her, and you will free my father?" "You're asking a lot," Jones said. "I'm offering a lot," Will replied. "Where is Shipwreck Cove?" Beckett asked angrily. "I don't know," Will said. Jones jumped forward and put his hands around Will's neck. "Then you have nothing that we want," he shouted. But Jones was wrong. Will looked at Beckett and held up Jack's compass. "What do you want most?" he asked, smiling. Boom! 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 There was a loud noise in the Brethren court as Barbossa hit the tabletop with a cannonball. Jack looked nervously around the room. He had a lot of enemies in there. "Will I get out alive?" he thought. The 8 pirate lords were sitting around a large table, some alone, others with their guards. Amand was a tall, black-haired pirate from the Barbary coast. Next to him sat Villanueva, an angry-looking Spaniard. Captain Chaval was next, a Frenchman with smart clothes. Fourth was Jocard, a man with shining black skin and a strong body. Then there was Mrs. Ching, a female Chinese pirate. She was the only woman, but she was one of the most dangerous people in the room. Finally, there was Sri Sumbaji from the Indian Ocean. He looked kind, but he had 2 large bodyguards named Akshay and Pusan. It wasn't wise to make him angry. Barbossa waited until everyone was silent. He pointed to a wooden bowl. "Your pieces of 8, captains." Slowly, each pirate lord stood and dropped something into the bowl. Jack kept his in his hand. "One pirate lord is missing," he said. "I'm happy to wait for Xiao Feng." "Xiao Feng is not coming," said a voice from the door. Everyone turned. There was Elizabeth Swan, wearing pirate clothes. Tai Huang and another Chinese sailor stood behind her. "He named me Captain of the Empress," Elizabeth explained. "He made me a pirate lord." "What happened to Xiao Feng?" asked Amand. "She probably killed him," Jack said quietly. "Will you never forgive me?" Elizabeth said to him. Then she turned to the other pirate lords. "We were attacked by the Flying Dutchman." "We must escape before the Dutchman finds us," some of them called urgently. "Listen to me," Elizabeth shouted. "Jones, under the command of Lord Beckett, is coming here." "How did they find Shipwreck Cove?" Jocard said angrily. "Who told them?" "Nobody in this room," Barbossa said. Elizabeth looked around. "Where's Will?" she asked Jack. "He's not in this room," Jack said. "Quiet," Barbossa told the pirate lords. "It's not important. What do we do now?" "We fight," Elizabeth said. The pirates began to laugh. Fight the Dutchman? Was she crazy? Mrs. Ching offered another suggestion. "Shipwreck Cove is well hidden. We don't need to fight if we stay here." The other pirate lords agreed. They could hide for a long time, until the Dutchman and the East India Trading Company left them alone. "I have a third plan," Barbossa said. Everyone turned to him. "Many years ago," he began, "the first Brethren court caught the goddess of the ocean. That was a mistake. We made the ocean safe for ourselves, but opened them to men like Beckett. Pirate lords, we must free Calypso." There was a surprised silence. Then the Indian pirate lord called his bodyguard Akshay. The large man listened, and then stepped forward and spoke. "Sri Sumbaji says—" Akshay pointed to Barbossa. "He is crazy. Do not listen to him." "Shoot him," Haman said. "Cut out his tongue," Jokar agreed. "Shoot him, and then cut out his tongue," Jack shouted happily. Elizabeth spoke. "I agree with Barbossa." "And I agree too," Villanueva said. "No," Jokar said. "Calypso was our enemy then. She will be our enemy now." "You're right," Cheval said. Villanueva pulled out his gun. "I still agree with Barbossa." Cheval hit him in the face. Suddenly all the pirates were shouting and fighting. "This is crazy!" Elizabeth shouted. "The enemy is very close. When we fight, we're doing Lord Beckett's job for him." On the Black Pearl, the subject of the court's discussion was in the ship's prison. Tia Dalma turned as Davy Jones came out from the shadows. "You!" Tia Dalma began. The happiness in her voice disappeared when she saw the gun in his hand. "You're going to kill me before the brethren free me." Jones didn't speak. He was in a room with the love of his life. "What have you become? You were many things, Davy Jones, but you were never a monster." "I learned it from you," Jones cried. "For 10 years I commanded the Dutchman. I did the job that you gave me. But when I stepped back onto the land, you weren't there. Why?" Tia Dalma touched his beard. "I can't help it. It's the way I am. But you love me." Davy Jones looked away. "I don't love you," he said angrily. "That's sad," Tia Dalma said quietly, "because soon I will be free, and when I am, I can give you my heart. We can be together, always." Davy Jones slowly put the gun back in his belt. As he moved back into the shadows, he turned to her again. "And the Brethren Court?" he asked. "They made me a prisoner," Tia Dalma said angrily. "They will suffer." Barbossa hit the table again, and the pirates turned to him. "We can free Calypso. Then she'll be grateful and help us." "I agree with Captain Swan," said Jack. "We fight." Barbossa laughed. "You've always run away from a fight." "That's not true," Jack said. "I fight hard and often, because then I can run away. We can stay here for years, but we'll be prisoners. We must fight to run away." "Who will we fight?" Mrs. Ching asked. "Beckett," Elizabeth said immediately. The pirates agreed. They decided to fight the East India Trading Company and to destroy the Dutchman. Barbossa had other ideas, but the pirates didn't listen. "The pirate lords must free Calypso, or my plan will fail," he thought. "Tia Dalma will be angry." He tried again. "Only the Pirate King can start a war. Call Captain Teague, keeper of the pirate law." 2 pirates ran out of the room and returned with the old pirate. He was carrying a large book. This was the famous Pirate Law, written by the First Brethren Court. Teague unlocked the book and opened it. Everyone waited for him to speak. Finally, he looked up. "Barbossa is right," he said. Jack read out the words. "Only the king can start a war, talk to the enemy, and organize our men." "We haven't had a king since the first court," Cheval said. "Why?" Elizabeth asked Gibbs. "The king is chosen by a vote," Gibbs explained in a low voice. "Each pirate only votes for himself." "I call for a vote," shouted Jack. Armand lifted his hand. "I vote for Armand the Corsair," he said. "Captain Cheval," said Cheval. The vote continued around the table. "I'll have to do what they do," Elizabeth thought, then said, "Elizabeth Swann." Jack looked around him. "I vote for Elizabeth Swann." The other pirates shouted angrily. Jack spoke to the court. "Aren't we going to follow the pirate law?" he asked. "We have to," Mrs. Ching said. "What do you say, Captain Swan, King of the Brethren Court?" The new pirate king stood up. "In the morning," she said, "we shall fight the East India Trading Company, destroy the Dutchmen, and escape to the ocean." The pirates moved out to their ships. Angrily, Barbossa gave a sign to Pintel and Ragetti. They picked up the bowl with the pieces of 8 and followed him out of the room. Jack left last. His plans were starting to work, but he still wanted to be captain of the Dutchman. As the Black Pearl and the Empress prepared for war, hundreds of pirate ships met near Shipwreck Cove. On every deck, pirates sharpened their swords and prepared their cannon. Suddenly, they saw the Endeavour through the grey clouds. The pirates lifted their swords. One ship against hundreds of pirate boats? Lord Beckett couldn't win. But then they saw another ship, and another, and another, and another. The pirates' excited cries slowly stopped. Then the water began to move. The Flying Dutchman came up out of the ocean in front of Beckett's ships. The pirates were silent as they looked at the monstrous faces of Davy Jones and his men. Lord Beckett was standing on the deck of the Endeavour. He smiled. "Jack kept his promise and brought me the pirates," he thought. "But what will he do next?" Every pirate was asking the same question. Thousands of angry eyes turned to Jack. "Sorry," Jack said. "Let's talk to Lord Beckett." There was an island near the ships. A short time later, Jack, Elizabeth, and Barbossa stepped out of a small boat and walked across the white sand. Lord Beckett, Davy Jones, and Will Turner stepped out of a second boat. They met in the middle of the beach. "You brought these people to us," Barbossa said to Will. "Don't be angry with Turner," Lord Beckett said. "The plan belongs to the person on your left." Elizabeth and Barbossa turned to Jack. Jack turned and looked to his left, too. There was nobody there. "Me?" he said. "It wasn't me." Will agreed. "It wasn't Jack." "Will," Elizabeth said softly. She felt sorry for him. "I've travelled on the Dutchman," she said. "I understand your problem. But you can't help your father." "I must try," Will said, and looked quickly at Jack. "Do they have a plan that I don't know about?" Elizabeth asked herself. Lord Beckett held up Jack's compass and looked at Jack. "Turner was working for you. He had your compass." Barbossa looked angrily at Jack. So he was the pirate's real enemy. "You agreed to bring the pirates to me," Beckett continued. He threw the compass to Jack. "And here they are. Now you can have your prize." "And what is his prize?" Barbossa asked. Beckett pointed at Elizabeth. "Her," he said. "When the brethren are dead, Jack will sail away on the Pearl. Elizabeth will be in his arms." "Jack wants the Pearl, not me," Elizabeth thought. Davy Jones finally spoke. "You still belong to me," he said to Jack. "You'll stay on the Dutchman for 100 years. Suddenly, Elizabeth understood. Jack doesn't want to die again, she thought, so he'll kill Davy Jones and become captain of the Dutchman. And he'll free Will's father, and Will can stay with me. She knew what to say now. "There's no better end for Jack Sparrow than on the Flying Dutchman," she agreed. "Here's my suggestion. Will leaves with us, and you can have Jack." "Yes," said Will quickly. "Elizabeth, love, you're sending me to my death," Jack said. "Again." Jack moved toward Beckett and Jones. His piece of 8 fell to the ground, and Barbossa picked it up. "Tell your friends this," Beckett said. "You can fight, and you will all die. Or you can not fight, and most of you will die." It was time for the fight to begin. Chapter 12. Fight to the Death. Will and Barbossa followed Elizabeth onto the Pearl. "We'll need the Black Pearl to head the attack," she said. "Will we?" Barbossa said, holding up Jack's piece of 8. Pintel brought Tia Dalma up on deck. She looked small and weak, but a goddess was hidden inside her. Barbossa made a sign, and the Chinese pirates moved toward Elizabeth and Will. "We must help Jack," Elizabeth said. "If he kills Davy Jones, then we can win this fight." "Sorry, King of the Pirates," Barbossa said. "I don't think Jack can win anything." He suddenly took Elizabeth's piece of 8 and added it to the others in the bowl. When all 9 pieces were together, he called, "Calypso, I am freeing you." Suddenly, the bowl was on fire. When it stopped burning, the goddess was standing on the deck. "Calypso!" Will shouted. "Who helped the first Brethren Court to make you a prisoner? Who was your enemy?" "Name him," said Calypso in a loud, strong voice. "Davy Jones," Will said. Calypso turned and looked angrily at the Dutchman. She began to grow, getting taller and taller. Barbossa stood in front of her. "Calypso," he called, "I have kept my promise. Please help me. Save me, my ship, and my men, but destroy the others." The goddess didn't look at him. "Crazy man," she shouted. Suddenly she fell. Thousands of crabs landed in place of her body. They ran over the edge of the deck and into the water. The goddess of the ocean disappeared completely. The pirates were silent. Finally, Will said, "Has she gone?" "She was our last hope," said Barbossa sadly. "We can still fight," Will said. "Against hundreds of ships," Gibbs said, "we can't win." Elizabeth looked up. "Jack can find the box and put a knife through Davy Jones's heart," she said. "We must fight with him. We're part of a team. We must work together or die alone." She looked at the sailors around her. "Listen," she called. "The brethren want the pearl to head the fight. Show the enemy that we are free men. Show them the fire from our guns. Show them that our hearts are brave." She suddenly pulled out her sword and pointed it toward the Endeavour. All around the Black Pearl, pirates on other ships prepared to fight the East India Trading Company. Becket stood quietly on the Endeavour, drinking tea. He smiled. He wasn't worried, because he had the Dutchman. On the deck of the Dutchman, as Mercer ordered the sailors to prepare the cannon, the wind was getting stronger. "Calypso," Davy Jones said quietly to himself. Dark clouds circled high in the sky, and heavy rain fell. As the other ships successfully sailed away from the rough waters, the Pearl and the Flying Dutchman were pulled toward them. Mercer was at the wheel of the Dutchman. "The waves won't hurt us," Jones shouted. He took the wheel from Mercer, and the Dutchman sailed into the roughest of the water. The Black Pearl followed. Elizabeth and Will ran down the deck, ready to face the Dutchman. Both ships prepared their cannon. "Fire!" ordered Barbossa. "Fire!" ordered Davy Jones. On the Dutchman, Davy Jones was watching Mercer. Suddenly, he jumped on the company officer and pulled his terrible beard around his neck. A minute later, Mercer was dead. Jones took the key that unlocked the wooden box. In the Dutchman's prison, Jack Sparrow hit the door with a chair until it opened. He moved quietly to the captain's room and found the box with Jones's heart. He ran back to the stairs with it and saw Davy Jones and his men. Jones pulled out his sword. "Give me the box," he ordered. He and Jack started to fight. The Dutchman and the Pearl were moving closer together. Will watched Elizabeth fight bravely against the Dutchman's sailors. "I don't want to lose her," he thought. "Not again." Turning to her, he asked, "Will you marry me?" "Now? This isn't the best time," Elizabeth shouted. Laughing, Will said, "This is the only time. I love you." Elizabeth looked into his eyes. This was the man that she loved. She wanted him. "Barbossa!" she shouted. "Marry us!" Barbossa was fighting on the deck above them. "I'm busy!" "Barbossa! Now!" Will called. Barbossa shouted, "As captain, I make you man and wife." Another pirate attacked him. "You can kiss the—" Will kissed Elizabeth. It was a kiss full of love and promises. At the same time, Jack Sparrow and Davy Jones continued to fight. Finally, Jack knocked Jones's sword out of his hand. "There's nothing that you can do with that," Jones said, pointing at the wooden box. "You need the key." "I already have the key," Jack answered with a smile. Jones's eyes filled with fear. Was it possible? Then he laughed. "No, you don't," he said, and showed Jack the key. "Oh, that key," Jack said. He cut through Jones's finger with his sword, and the key dropped to the floor. Suddenly, the pearl crashed into the Dutchman, and the wooden box fell onto the deck. Jones lifted it. Jack took a gun from one of Jones's men and fired. He hit Jones, and the box crashed back onto the deck. Quickly, Will Turner jumped over from the Pearl to the Dutchman to help Jack. Another cannonball hit the ship, and Will was knocked to the ground. Looking up, he saw Bootstrap Bill. Bootstrap began to attack Will with his sword. "Stop!" cried Will. What was his father doing? Elizabeth ran to the Dutchman and her husband. "I'll kill you!" Jones shouted, moving toward her. But Elizabeth was prepared. "That's why I brought this," she said, and lifted her sword. The two began to fight. Will and his father were also fighting. Finally, Will jumped onto Bootstrap. "I won't kill you," he said. "I made you a promise." He tied Bootstrap to the deck and ran to Elizabeth. Jack Sparrow picked up the key to Jones's box. Jones hit Elizabeth across the face and smiled. But then he looked down, and the smile disappeared. There was a sword in his chest. He looked over his shoulder and saw Will Turner. "Did you forget?" Jones asked. "I have no heart." He pushed Will away, then pulled the sword out of his chest. "Tell me, William Turner," he asked, "do you fear death?" Then suddenly he shouted with pain. "Do you?" Jack asked. Everyone turned to see Captain Jack Sparrow. The wooden box was open, and he was holding Jones's heart in his hand. He tightened his fingers. Jones gave a cry and held his chest. "You're a hard man, Jack Sparrow," Jones said. Then he turned and pushed his sword through Will's heart. Screaming, Elizabeth ran to Will. Jack looked from the heart to his sword, then at Will in Elizabeth's arms. Elizabeth looked up at Jack. "Please," she cried. As Jones fell into his own locker, his eyes turned to his now dead heart. The sword in it was Jack's, but the hand on the sword was Will's. Elizabeth's tears fell as she watched Will die. Slowly, Jones's pirates began to circle around Will's lifeless body, and Jack pulled her away. Bootstrap pulled out a knife and moved closer. One of the men held the wooden box in his arms. "The Dutchman must have a captain," Bootstrap said. "And a living heart," another pirate added. Bootstrap fell on his knees in front of his son, pulled open the young man's shirt, and lifted his knife. Jack shot through a line on one of the sails. The freed sail filled with air and lifted him and Elizabeth off the deck. Below them, the Dutchman fell deeper and deeper into the ocean. Jack and Elizabeth landed in the water near the Pearl. Gibbs pulled them out. "We need you, Jack," he said. "The Endeavour is very near." Beckett's ship was moving quickly toward them. Suddenly the water began to move, and the Flying Dutchman came up again. She had new white sails, and her men were clean and smart. Will Turner walked angrily onto the deck. The two ships sailed up on both sides of the Endeavour. Beckett couldn't escape. "I can't destroy the pirates," he said to himself, "and now they will destroy me." "Fire!" Will ordered. "Fire!" shouted Barbossa and Elizabeth. "Fire," said Jack, more quietly. Cannon fired. When the smoke cleared, the Endeavour was slowly going down into the blue Caribbean waters. Beckett's other ships turned away. "They're running," Gibbs said. "They're afraid because the Dutchman and the Pearl are working together." On the Dutchman, Captain William Turner looked sadly across at the Pearl. "Give us your orders, sir," said Bootstrap's voice behind him. "You can leave the Dutchman," Will said. "You're free." "I want to stay with you," Bootstrap said. "Fine. Take the ship's wheel, Mr. Turner." Bootstrap saw the sadness in his son's face. "1 day on land, 10 years on the ocean. It's a high price to pay," he said. Will smiled. "But it will be a good day." A little later, the men on the Black Pearl helped Elizabeth into a small boat. She was sailing to land and to Will. Will was sitting on a rock, looking out at the ocean. Elizabeth came up behind him and put her arms around him. "The sun is going down," Will said. "Soon I'll be back on the Dutchman, taking souls to the land of the dead." He gave her his heart in its wooden box. "Will you keep this safe?" "Yes," Elizabeth replied. "I'll guard it with my life." "I love you, Elizabeth," Will said simply. "Always." "And I love you," she answered. "I don't know what will happen to me and Will," Elizabeth thought, "or to the Brethren Court, Barbossa, and Jack. But now pirates are free to sail the oceans, and the new captain of the Flying Dutchman will keep the souls of the dead safe." Captain Jack Sparrow was on the island of Tortuga. "You'll like the Black Pearl," he said to the 2 women that he was with. "My ship is big and shining and—" Gone? The Pearl was sailing away without him. "It's happened again," he thought angrily. "How can a pirate earn his money honestly when people steal his ship all the time?" On the Pearl, Barbossa stood at the ship's wheel and opened Xiao Feng's old map. "There's more than one way to live forever," he thought. Then he stepped back, surprised. There was a hole in the middle of the map. "Jack Sparrow! Again!" In another part of the Caribbean, in a very small boat, Jack Sparrow looked at the missing piece of the map. Smiling, he pulled out his compass. He was ready for his next adventure. 10 years later, high above the ocean, a young boy was singing a pirate song. Elizabeth smiled as her son played. Then she ran to him. Suddenly the boy stopped. The sun was going down. Elizabeth and her son stood and watched the golden sun. It fell lower and lower in the sky, and then there was a green light. Out on the ocean they saw a much-loved shape. "Will has returned," Elizabeth said quietly. "He kept his promise."